The story of ancient Ireland starts thousands of years ago, when the first people came to the Green Island after the last ice age. These early hunters followed herds of animals across land bridges that once connected Ireland to Britain and mainland Europe. They found an island covered in thick forests, with plenty of fish in the rivers and wild animals to hunt. Around 4000 BC, the first farmers arrived in Ireland. They cleared parts of the forests to make fields where they grew barley and wheat. They kept cattle, sheep, and pigs. These farmers built the first permanent houses on the island, simple wooden structures with thatched roofs. They also started a tradition that would last for thousands of years. They built special tombs for their dead. The most famous of these are passage tombs like Newgrange, built around 3200 BC. Newgrange is older than the pyramids of Egypt. Every year on the winter solstice, the rising sun shines directly through a special opening above the entrance and lights up the burial chamber inside. The people of ancient Ireland were skilled workers of metal. Around 2500 BC, they learned how to make bronze by mixing copper and tin. This started the Bronze Age in Ireland. Craftspeople made beautiful bronze axes, spears, and swords. They also made stunning gold jewelry rings, necklaces, and decorated discs that showed how rich and powerful their owners were. Ireland had lots of gold in its rivers and streams, and Irish goldsmiths became famous for their work. The ancient Irish lived in small kingdoms. Each kingdom had its own king or chief, and these kings often fought with each other. They built ring forts, circular areas surrounded by high earth banks and ditches to protect their families and cattle from raiders. Thousands of these ring forts can still be seen across Ireland today. Around 700 BC, the Iron Age began in Ireland. People learned to make stronger tools and weapons from iron. They also made beautiful objects from other materials. Some of the most amazing treasures from ancient Ireland are the gold collars called torse and the huge bronze horns that people used in ceremonies and celebrations. The ancient Irish didn't write down their stories and history. Instead, they had a strong tradition of telling stories out loud. Special people called Bards memorized hundreds of stories, poems, and laws. They would tell these stories at feasts and gatherings. Many of these stories were about great heroes like Ciú Chulainn, who could fight whole armies by himself, and Queen Medb, who started a war over a famous bull. Religion was very important to the ancient Irish. They built sacred places on hills and near springs. They believed in many gods and goddesses who controlled nature, the seasons, and different parts of life. They thought some places were magical, especially hills, lakes, and trees. The most sacred trees were oak trees, and their priests, called Druids, often held ceremonies in oak forests. The Druids were very powerful people in ancient Irish society. They were not just priests, they were also judges, teachers, and advisors to kings. They spent many years learning the old stories, laws, and religious ceremonies. People believed Druids could do magic, tell the future, and talk to the spirits of nature. The ancient Irish year was divided into 4 main festivals. Samhain, now Halloween, marked the end of summer and the beginning of winter. Imbolc celebrated the start of spring. Beltane marked the beginning of summer, and Loch Ness celebrated the harvest. At these festivals, people would gather for feasts, games, and trading. Daily life in ancient Ireland was hard work. Most people lived on small farms, growing crops and taking care of animals. They made their own clothes from wool and leather. They built their houses from wood and lived together in small communities. Children started helping with farm work when they were very young. People didn't live as long as they do today. Many died young from diseases or accidents. Food in ancient Ireland was simple but filling. The main foods were milk, cheese, butter, meat, fish, and bread made from barley and wheat. People also collected wild berries, nuts, and honey. They cooked in big pots over fire pits and used wooden bowls and cups. Beer made from barley was a common drink. The ancient Irish were skilled craftspeople. Besides working with metal, they made beautiful things from wood, leather, and cloth. They wove bright-coloured clothes and decorated them with patterns. They carved wooden bowls and boxes with complex designs. They made strong leather shoes and bags. Women often wore long dresses held with bronze pins, while men wore tunics and trousers. Music was an important part of life. People played wooden flutes, bronze horns, and small harps. They sang songs about heroes, love, and daily life. At feasts and festivals, musicians would play while others danced or told stories. Some of the ancient Irish musical traditions continue today in Irish folk music. Trade was important in ancient Ireland. Even though it was an island, people traded with Britain and other parts of Europe. They exported gold, furs, and hunting dogs, which were famous for their strength and skill. They brought in things they couldn't make themselves, like certain types of jewelry and weapons. Traders used small boats made of wood or animal skins to cross the seas. The ancient Irish were great builders. Even though they didn't use stone as much as other ancient peoples, they built huge monuments like Newgrange using just stone tools and lots of hard work. They also built wooden roads across bogs so people could travel more easily. Some of these wooden roads were several miles long. War was common in ancient Ireland. Kings and chiefs often fought each other over land, cattle, or honour. Warriors used spears, swords, and shields. Some rode in chariots pulled by horses. Before a battle, warriors would sometimes challenge each other to single combat. The winners of these fights became famous, and bards made up songs about their bravery. The ancient Irish had strict laws about honour and fairness. If someone hurt another person or stole something, they had to pay a fine to make up for it. The size of the fine depended on how serious the crime was and how important the victim was. Kings and chiefs had to follow these laws too, or they could lose their power. Women in ancient Ireland had more rights than in many other ancient societies. They could own property, choose their husbands, and even become rulers. Some of the most famous stories from ancient Ireland are about powerful queens like Medieval warriors like Scafach, who trained young heroes. The ancient Irish believed in an afterlife. They thought people's spirits went to a happy place called the other world. They buried important people with their valuable things so they could use them in the afterlife. They also believed that sometimes the barrier between our world and the other world became thin, allowing spirits to pass between them. Houses in ancient Ireland were usually round and made of wooden posts with walls of woven branches covered in mud. The roofs were thatched with straw or reeds. In the centre of the house was a fire pit for cooking and warmth. People slept on beds of straw covered with fur blankets. Animals were often kept in part of the house during winter. The ancient Irish kept track of time using the sun, moon, and stars. They built monuments like Newgrange to mark important times of the year. They divided the year into seasons based on farming and religious festivals. They also used the phases of the moon to plan activities like planting crops and holding ceremonies. Children in ancient Ireland learned by watching and helping their parents. Boys learned to farm, hunt, and fight. Girls learned to cook, make clothes, and take care of animals. Children from rich families might learn from Druids about history, law, and religion. Play was important too. Children had toys made of wood and played games that taught them useful skills. Art in ancient Ireland was full of swirling patterns and geometric shapes. Artists decorated metal objects, stone monuments, and even everyday items with these designs. They used spirals, circles, and flowing lines that seemed to have no beginning or end. These patterns may have had religious meanings that we don't understand today. The ancient Irish had many superstitions and beliefs about luck. They carried lucky charms and avoided doing certain things that they thought would bring bad luck. They believed in fairy-like creatures called the Siddi, who lived in special places like hills and springs. People left out small offerings of food and drink to keep these creatures happy. Tools were very important in ancient Ireland. People used stone axes to cut down trees and clear land. They had bronze and later iron tools for farming ploughs to turn the soil, sickles to cut grain, and mills to grind it into flour. They made fishing nets from plant fibres and used spears and traps to catch fish. The ancient Irish were good at working with leather. They made shoes, bags, and straps for horses. They knew how to treat animal skins to make them soft and waterproof. They also made boats called currachs by stretching leather over wooden frames. These boats were light and good for fishing and short trips across water. The language of ancient Ireland was an early form of Irish. Many of the words we know came down to us through stories and poems that were written down much later. The ancient Irish also used a special alphabet called ogham, mainly for carving short messages on stone. Many ogham stones still stand today, mostly showing people's names. Ancient Irish society had different social classes. At the top were kings and noble families. Below them were free farmers who owned their own land. Then came farmers who rented land from others. At the bottom were slaves, usually prisoners captured in wars. People could sometimes move between these classes by becoming richer or poorer. The ancient Irish were connected to nature and the land around them. They knew which plants could be used for medicine and which were poisonous. They watched birds and animals to predict weather changes. They believed everything in nature had a spirit and should be treated with respect. The coming of Christianity in the 5th century AD slowly changed many things about ancient Irish life, but some old traditions and beliefs survived, mixing with the new religion. Many ancient Irish festivals became Christian holidays. Old sacred places became Christian churches. Even today, some ancient Irish customs and beliefs continue in modern Irish culture. Ancient Ireland was not one unified country but a patchwork of small kingdoms. These kingdoms sometimes joined together in loose alliances, but they never had one single ruler. Each kingdom had its own traditions and ways of doing things, though they shared many common beliefs and customs. The ancient Irish were proud of their family connections. They kept careful track of who was related to whom, often remembering family histories going back many generations. This was important because family connections helped decide things like who could become king and who would inherit property. The ancient Irish way of life lasted for thousands of years, changing slowly as new tools, ideas, and beliefs came to the island. Many traces of ancient Ireland can still be seen today in the landscape, in Irish traditions, and in the stories that have been passed down through generations. These reminders help us understand how people lived in Ireland's ancient past. The ancient Irish were excellent at predicting weather patterns, which was vital for farming and travel. They watched the sky, noticed how animals behaved, and passed this knowledge down through generations. They knew that certain cloud formations meant rain was coming, or that when birds flew in particular ways, a storm might be approaching. The old Irish calendar split each month into 2 parts, following the moon's cycles. People planned their farming work, festivals, and daily activities around these periods. They believed some times were better than others for important tasks like planting crops or getting married. Trading centres in ancient Ireland were usually near river crossings or on hills. People would gather at these places to buy and sell goods, arrange marriages, settle arguments, and share news. These meetings were also times for music, storytelling, and games. Young people could meet potential marriage partners, while older folks caught up with friends and relatives. Cattle were extremely important in ancient Ireland. They weren't just food, they were like money. People measured their wealth by how many cattle they owned. Most arguments and wars started because of cattle raids, when one group would steal another's cows. The famous story of the Tainbow Cuelge tells about a huge cattle raid that turned into a war between different parts of Ireland. Ancient Irish burial customs changed over time. The earliest people built huge stone tombs. Later, they buried people in the ground with their favourite things, weapons, jewellery, or tools. Some very important people were buried sitting up, facing the rising sun. Others were cremated, and their ashes were put in decorated clay pots. The ancient Irish were careful about hospitality. Anyone who came to their door had to be given food and shelter. Even enemies had to be treated well if they asked for hospitality. Breaking these rules was considered one of the worst things someone could do. Stories tell of terrible punishments for people who harmed their guests. Children played games that taught them useful skills. They practiced throwing small stones to improve their aim for hunting. They played chase games that made them fast runners. They had toys like small wooden boats, clay animals, and balls made from wool or leather. Many of these games helped prepare them for adult life. The Irish made their own medicines from plants and herbs. They knew which plants could help with headaches, stomach problems, or wounds. Some of these old cures worked so well that modern scientists are studying them. Healers passed their knowledge down from parent to child, keeping it secret from others. Ancient Irish clothes were colourful. Rich people wore clothes dyed bright purple, blue, or red. Common people usually wore clothes in natural wool colours, brown, grey, or white. The dyes came from plants, trees, and even tiny insects. Making coloured cloth took a lot of time and skill. Every important place in ancient Ireland had stories connected to it. Hills, lakes, and stones all had tales about how they got their names or what happened there. People still tell some of these stories today. They explain why a mountain has a certain shape, or why a lake formed in a particular spot. The ancient Irish loved riddles and word games. Poets would challenge each other with hard riddles. Children learned riddles as a way to remember important information. Some ancient Irish riddles still survive, though we don't always understand their answers today. Ancient Irish houses didn't have chimneys. Smoke from the fire just drifted up through holes in the roof. This kept the roof material dry and helped preserve food that was stored in the rafters. The smoke also kept away insects that might damage the roof. The Irish made their clothes without buttons. They used pins made of bronze or iron to fasten their clothes. Some of these pins were simple and plain, while others were beautifully decorated. Rich people had pins made of silver or gold. Finding these pins helps archaeologists learn about how ancient Irish people dressed. Sports and games were popular in ancient Ireland. Young men competed in running, jumping and throwing contests. They played a game like hockey using wooden sticks and balls. Wrestling matches were common at festivals. Winners got prizes and became famous for their skills. Every king in ancient Ireland had a special chair or stone where they were made king. These inauguration places were usually on hills. When a new king was chosen, they had to perform certain ceremonies and promise to rule fairly. Some of these old inauguration places are still known today. Ancient Irish boats were made in different ways. Small fishing boats were often just tree trunks hollowed out by burning and scraping. Bigger boats were made of wooden planks tied together with rope or leather strips. The largest boats could carry many people and animals across seas and rivers. The Irish were skilled at working with wood. They made everything from houses to bowls to toys from different kinds of trees. Oak was used for important buildings because it's strong. Yew was good for making bows because it's springy. Hazel was used for small items because it's easy to carve. Ancient Irish warriors sometimes painted or tattooed their bodies before battle. They might colour their faces or arms with blue paint made from a plant called woad. They did this to look scary to their enemies. Some warriors made their hair stand up stiff using lime. The ancient Irish kept bees for honey and wax. Honey was the only sweet food they had, and they used it as medicine too. Beeswax was used to make candles and to help preserve leather. Beekeepers were important people because honey and wax were valuable. People in ancient Ireland didn't use money like we do today. Instead, they traded things they had for things they needed. A farmer might trade some cheese for a new pot or some wool for a knife. Only much later did people start using coins, and these usually came from other countries. Ancient Irish laws protected trees. Different trees had different values. Cutting down someone's oak tree without permission meant paying a big fine. Fruit trees were also valuable. Even collecting nuts from someone else's trees without asking was against the law. The Irish told stories about the salmon of knowledge. They believed that eating this special salmon would make someone very wise. One famous story tells how the hero Fionn mac Cumhaill caught the salmon but accidentally tasted it while cooking it for his teacher. This gave him great wisdom. Ancient Irish builders knew many tricks for construction. They built walls that have stood for thousands of years. They knew how to stack stones so rain would drain away instead of weakening the wall. They built roofs that could stand up to strong winds. Many of their techniques are still studied today. These stories and facts about ancient Ireland show us how smart and skilled these people were. They knew how to live well using what they had around them. They created beautiful things, told wonderful stories, and made laws that helped people live together peacefully. Many things they learned and created influenced the way Irish people live today. The ancient Irish left us many clues about how they lived. Every year, farmers find old tools in their fields. People renovating old buildings find ancient objects in the walls or under the floors. Scientists study these objects to learn more about life in ancient Ireland. They also study old bones, seeds, and pollen to understand what people ate and how they changed the land. What these ancient people knew and did helps us understand our own lives better. They remind us that people have always needed the same basic things: food, shelter, family, and friends. They show us that people have always liked stories, music, and art. Most importantly, they teach us that we can learn useful things from studying the past.